Welcome back to Conservative Conversations. I'm your host, Reid.
And I'm Frank.
Today we're going to be talking about Ron DeSantis suspending his election campaign, making this a two-man race between Trump and Nikki Haley. So let's discuss that and more. Before we get started, listeners, I want to remind you to please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And you can also subscribe to our audios on YouTube. We would greatly appreciate it. And to get started, we're going to be talking about the big news over the weekend. It's Monday as we record. It'll be Wednesday if you're listening to this on release day. But Ron DeSantis has suspended his campaign for president. And that certainly surprised me. I didn't hear until this morning as the day of recording. And it was pretty big news last night.
Yeah, it definitely was. I mean, it changed a lot of conversations like that. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, we were just having a conversation yesterday about him, and now the point is moot.
Yep, pretty much. I mean, one of the things I was originally going to talk about in relation to the caucuses in Iowa is how it was covered after Trump had won. Everybody was basically calling it game over. There's no path forward for anybody else. Trump's the presumptive nominee based on the data. And part of what my issue was at the time, and first I'll say, like I've said before, I'm certainly willing to support Trump, but my first pick was going to be Ron DeSantis. And I thought, there's 49 other states that had yet to vote for, their the nominee of the party. And only after one state that only less than 200,000 people voted in, they're calling it, Trump the presumptive nominee and everybody else should just get behind him. And I thought, that was kind of discouraging because it's 2 months until the Ohio primary. And if everybody's talking about how, based on the data, the same data that we were relying on for 2022, the big red wave, in 2020, when we thought Trump would win then. And I felt like I was slightly discouraged in even going out to vote on the primary. Because I thought if everybody's saying that Trump's the presumptive nominee, then why would I bother to go pitching my vote for Ron DeSantis? But now I guess it doesn't matter, because I was also going to say until he drops out, I'm still going to vote for him, but he dropped out. So I guess it doesn't matter too much now.
Well, and it's funny, about the point being moot. One of the things we were talking about just yesterday was how I had seen a Mark Dice video where he was talking about this point where he says, he was making a point where he says that DeSantis should stay in the race. He was saying that DeSantis was going to drop out at some point.
Right,
okay.
Sure.
But he was saying that DeSantis should stay in the race past New Hampshire, past, South Carolina, and continue to draw votes away from Nikki Haley.
Right.
And in a way, what I was telling you is I thought that was a very interesting sort of strategy.
Right, yeah.
And I sort of liked it. And, I had definitely warmed up to Ron DeSantis quite a bit, too. I mean, I always liked him.
Yeah.
But I didn't know, that he was my first pick for president. And so trying to wrap my head around that, a couple of times I had really liked what he was bringing to the table. He was a very solid candidate.
Sure.
But, him dropping out now has made a lot of conversations moot. And this idea of him drawing votes away from Nikki Haley, isn't going to happen now. And there's been some interesting talk that I've seen out there about some people discussing how sort of like independent voters might swing a lot of votes to Nikki Haley.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
And a lot of people who, like, Democrats who have switched their affiliation so that they can vote in this primary.
Right.
And just, they're like trying to, I guess the idea is like strip the nomination away from Trump. you know, even if they don't want Nikki Haley to be president or anything like that. So I thought that was interesting, and I saw a piece, that's going to be included in the show notes here, specifically about New Hampshire and how they have a very strong independent.
Yeah, I've heard like 40% of the voters.
So, I mean, I think it will be interesting to see how this goes in New Hampshire now.
Right.
And mind you, this comes on top of the fact that Nikki Haley was already basically out there saying, before Ron DeSantis dropped out, she was saying that it was only her and Trump in the race.
Yeah, right. She was saying it was a two-man race.
Yeah. So I think it'll be really interesting now, without having this third option of DeSantis on the ballot.
Right.
I think it'll be interesting to see what comes of this two-man race, because I guess it is now.
Yeah.
And, I don't know if you have did you have anything else to say?
I mean, I was just going to say, I think even if Nikki Haley makes it out of New Hampshire winning, it does not sound like she's going to win her home state, because so many politicians from South Carolina have backed Trump. You got Tim Scott, Nancy Mace, the current governor of South Carolina, maybe a couple more that I'm not aware of, but that's at least 3 pretty big names in the Republican Party from South Carolina, where Nikki Haley was the governor, not endorsing her.
Well, absolutely. And that's where I was going to go with it, is I was going to talk about how a lot of people, not only like the Viveks and the Ron DeSantis's, they've come out and publicly pledged to Trump now or whatever, and encouraged that basically that their supporters should put their faith in Trump, so to speak.
Right.
But yeah, Tim Scott was a big one. She appointed him to the Senate when she was governor. So, I mean, that was a big one. And then I think it's interesting, even people who haven't come out and said that they're going to support Trump.
Right.
There have been some people like Ron Paul, he's a big one, who have come out against her vehemently.
Right.
They're still maybe iffy about Trump for whatever reason.
Sure, but they're not for her.
Never Nikki is what Rand Paul has come out with. Okay. He's got this whole, whatever you call it, like a networking campaign or social media thing, where he's doing this hashtag Never Nikki thing. That was pretty funny. I saw it the other day.
Right.
But I just think it's interesting, especially like I was just saying about the independents and the Democrats trying to do this sway towards Nikki.
Right.
Because just like Ron DeSantis said in his sort of concession speech when he threw in the towel or whatever, however you want to put that.
Sure.
He basically said that we're facing a question right now of where the party is and where it's going, where it's headed, whether we're going to be electing people like Nikki Haley, these sort of old school Republicans, what some people call the neocons, the ones who like to go to war, and
the corporatists.
Yeah, the corporatists, exactly, all that. Or whether it's going to be this more Trump era, American first type Republicans. And it's hard to say that without bringing up Trump's name.
Right.
I mean, he was very... how do you put it? Novel in a way. He really changed the Republican Party.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I almost would bet that... hold on one second. Gotta get some water here. I almost felt like I was gonna get a tickle. Well, I would almost bet that... Trump just might get the nomination and win in November, because, you can probably say about every election that it's not a normal, your normal election year, but this year is particularly different because one of the main candidates is being sued out the wazoo by civil suits, state suits, federal suits. He's trying to be kicked off the ballot in some states, and he's served his one term, and it's pretty historical, if you will. And I think he just might join the history books with our good pal, Grover Cleveland.
I think so, too.
Yep. The only other president to have served non-consecutive terms. And,
he'll be the 45th and 47th president.
And history does funny things sometimes, and I feel like we're going to get one of those times for the history books.
I hope so, to be honest.
Yep. Well, because I also think, and this is just sort of, my own personal worldview of sorts, but it seems like we're sort of going through, like, some kind of fit in our society. Or like maybe we're tossing and turning and trying to break a fever. And I don't know how soon it's going to break, but it'll break soon. And I think some things will start to normalize. Because we already see it in some ways, like the whole DEI stuff. More evidence is coming out about how those types of policies are negatively impacting, the everyday person.
Yeah.
So I think we're marching towards a turn in the country, hopefully anyway.
Well, I find a lot of hope in that, and I think it's interesting. I absolutely agree with you, because one of the complaints that Nikki has had, if you listen to her about Trump, is not only is she trying to say, that he's an old man and he's losing his mind and whatever.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah. But she's also said, and this is a complaint about him, some people are fearful of him, because they say that he has a list of things he wants to relitigate and lord over and dominate and fix, so to speak, and he doesn't have a list of things he wants to do, positive things he wants to do. He's looking backwards, not forwards, so to speak. But I just find that so hard to swallow, and I think the American public will too.
Right.
Because the 4 years that we lived under Trump, if you look back at the record, at the stocks, at whatever, everything, the period that he was president is some of the best on the books.
Right.
Top of the charts. And we felt it.
Right? Not even just in the economy, but even in foreign affairs.
Absolutely.
Where we had the peace agreement, the Abraham Accords. And those have basically been done away with. I don't know if, in the actual sense, they've undone the agreements, but they've certainly been disrupted with the lack of strength this administration is showing on the global stage. Not projecting the strength and help keeping some order.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's the highest that consumer confidence had ever been in the economy.
Right.
I mean, it was top of the charts in so many regards, and it was only a short period of time ago.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what gives me the best hope is there's a real example, there's real data from within a 10-year period that you can point at and say, look at those spikes.
Right. Exactly. I mean, because those policies came after the whole entire 8 years of Obama, so you can probably even compare his 8 years to his 4 years, and I'm sure in some regards they're better. And then, when you look at how terrible these 4 years have been under Joe Biden, which have been awful, and I feel like some people have said they're even worse than the Obama years.
Absolutely.
So it would, at least in my mind, it's reasonable to think that it's not going to be too hard for Trump to, sort of redo what he did and hopefully do it better.
Yep.
But yeah, I'm definitely a little hopeful. It's disappointing that in a way that Ron DeSantis dropped out. I don't get to vote for him, but I'm certainly ready to go vote for Donald Trump to make sure Nikki doesn't get the nomination.
Well, and I don't think she will.
Right.
I just think it's so interesting, this sinister plan to deprive Trump of the nomination. I mean, it's if the American people don't want to vote for him, they don't have to. They can write in Mickey Mouse.
Right.
So, for goodness sakes, I don't understand why these sick people are just so desperate.
Right? I don't either. I mean, they're the Democrats often are shouting about how democracy's under attack, and of course we've talked about how we're not a real democracy, but even if we were, how is democracy under attack by President Trump when, one, he's not even in office, and when he was in office, people still got to vote, and now that it's a different president in office, a particular candidate, is having attempts made against them to be not on the ballot for people to vote in this democracy that they're so worried about.
Yeah.
They want their cake, and then they want to eat it too, or something like that. I mean, they're trying to have it two ways, I guess.
He's so scary, you're not allowed to vote for him. We're protecting you from yourself.
Right.
You might vote for him, and you can't.
Right? Because democracy is so important.
Yes.
That you need to be able to not vote.
That's right.
Yeah, it's crazy. I think
That's the Democrats.
right. The cracks are starting to form in the policies they've been implementing over the years, and the people don't like it. And I think we're gonna go back to a time where people did like for a little while. And it remains to be seen how successful Trump will be, of course. But I'm ready for it.
I can't wait.
Yep. I guess that's all we got on the primary elections. As you're listening to this, it's a day after New Hampshire votes, so presumably by the time we talk about the news again, we'll have the results on that primary. I'll start with the next story. As we're recording, over the weekend, it was the March for Life, the 51st annual, happened in D.C., which I believe it's in D.C. every year. And I was just curious to kind of see what the attendance was like this year, because it's been awfully cold and snowy. So I went to DuckDuckGo, which in some ways is not any better than Google, based on the results I sometimes get. But I just typed in 2024 March for Life turnout to see if I can find out about how many people showed up. Well, the first article that popped up came from NPR, our great taxpayer-sponsored news radio.
Yeah.
And I did not get the answer I was looking for, but I did get a few interesting observations from this article. And it was written by a Jacqueline Diaz. And right away, in the first sentence, we get some interesting language. Now, we're talking about the March for Life, which I'm sure most people listening to this program knows what that is. It's an annual march for the pro-life movement. And the first sentence from this article says, thousands of anti-abortion activists met Friday on the Washington, D.C. mall, at the mall in Washington, D.C., for the 51st annual March for Life. Did you notice anything?
Thousands?
No. It's the March for Life, but the description they use for the people gathering are anti-abortion activists rather than pro-life advocates.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Right? And after I had read through this article the first time and sort of noticed that, I tried to do like a find a word search on the page for pro-life.
Yeah.
Nope. Not once.
Interesting.
Not once did NPR, our government-funded news, use the phrase pro-life. Every description. The best one they had was March for Life attendees or something like that. But there was even a description of a picture that they had, a caption that said, anti-abortion activist uses megaphone to say something or other. And there's even one sentence, and it's after they're sort of talking. This article is talking about some of the anti-abortion laws that have been passed in states. It says like states like Ohio have put abortion rights on the ballot for voters to decide. In instances where this has happened, abortion advocates have lost. Yet last November, Ohio voters have approved an amendment to the Constitution to guarantee the right to abortion and other reproductive rights. And then the next start of a paragraph says, this is why anti-abortion activists are still gearing up for a long, long struggle to stop abortion, said marcher, then somebody's name that's kind of hard to pronounce, from Maryland, who's attending his 50th march.
Wow.
Well, the quotes begin at long, long struggle, is what the quotations are from this marcher. So the article is even describing this person that they're quoting as the anti-abortion activist.
Wow.
Right? And, you know, the name of the movement is March for Life. You can at least have the decency to call them what I would assume most of those people would identify as first pro-life advocates.
Right.
Rather than just anti-abortion activists or whatever.
Right. It shows their bias,
yeah,
obviously.
Yes, definitely.
Absolutely. You
know. But I didn't really have too much to say about it other than, you know, I went looking just for a little bit of info about how many people attended. I guess thousands attended. But I also got government-sponsored propaganda about anti-abortion activists.
Well, it just goes to show the state of affairs.
Yeah,
you know,
it's
a sign of the times.
Right.
Reporting in general is basically down the tubes. Nobody's neutral anymore.
Yep, neutral. Yeah,
because you can't even present the two sides for what they are.
Right.
You just have whatever abortion and anti-abortion.
Yep. Right.
You just got to keep abortion as the primary focus.
Right. You know, we're always, whenever these budget deals come around, we're talking about how we can cut funding. And this is one of the things that I feel like should be cut, is NPR.
Well, absolutely. And the ad council, too. I've been saying that for years.
I mean, in my mind, I don't think there's really any need for it, because I can understand maybe a government-sponsored radio station if people had to pay to access radio stations.
Right.
You know, kind of like how there are special programs for people who in poverty have access to, you know, like utilities and stuff.
Yeah.
But it doesn't cost any money other than purchasing a radio, which are pretty darn cheap these days.
Sure.
To get access to the news radio, however you want it. There's conservative news stations, there's liberal news stations, there's probably some in the middle. So you don't need the government to come in and pay for a radio station, particularly if it's not going to be held to account to be neutral, which it should be if it's taxpayer funded. But yeah, I guess I'll sort of leave it there.
Well, I just want to say I
Sure.
totally agree with that. And
Right.
I've said for years, like I brought up the ad council, I think it's ridiculous that they take your tax money, then give it to the ad council for free,
Right.
just for them to put out ads to tell you not to smoke and to put your seatbelt on.
Right.
When I already know smoking's bad for me. They print it on all the cigarette packages.
Right.
You know, I mean, that's just an example. I don't even smoke anymore. But with the seatbelts, I know
Yeah.
if I don't wear my seatbelt, I'll get a ticket.
Right.
Why do you have to? And it's posted all over the roads and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you also have to come on my radio and onto my TV and tell me click it or ticket
Right.
or whatever? Paid with my tax dollars.
Right.
I mean, it's just some of that stuff's ridiculous. I don't know that the seatbelt example is the best example, but I think it's a pretty good one. Everybody knows to wear their seatbelt, for goodness sakes.
Yeah, especially these
So
days.
why would you still be taking my money just to tell me to wear my seatbelt?
Right? I mean, just take my money when I'm not wearing the seatbelt. I mean, that's how that should go. But yeah, I certainly wouldn't mind something like NPR, like if they were neutral, as I was saying a moment ago. But they're not, and if they're not going to be, and if there's not going to be any kind of rule or regulation that says they have to be, then they should be done away with.
I think the idea would be something like it would have to be neutral.
Yeah.
It would have to be neutral. But the idea of a national public radio, of an NPR, would be so that journalists could be truly independent. And if they wanted to do a story about Monsanto, but Monsanto was bribing every newspaper across the nation not to run stories about their new XYZ product, then somebody could still get out a story about how the new XYZ product causes cancer or whatever.
Yeah.
They'd have a neutral place where they were somewhat protected to be able to publish such stories that other people might try, vehemently, by hook or by crook, to keep the story quiet.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me, too.
But not just to be a
mouthpiece
propaganda tool, for the government, just for them to pump out, churn, pro-democratic,
Right. I mean, because I suppose, I'm not one who usually listens to NPR on the regular, but I'm fairly sure I've definitely seen articles and heard clips back during Trump's administration that are always going after him. So it's not like even when the administration changes, the propaganda by NPR or these types of government-sponsored news outlets, PBS being the other one, the messaging doesn't change based on the current administration. It's all still the same, one way.
Yeah.
So down with the NPR.
Amen.
And I guess that's all I got. I wanted to find out how well attended this year's March for Life was, but instead I found government propaganda. Or government-sponsored propaganda. I don't know how you want to look at it. But that's all I got on that story. I'll have a link to the NPR article if anybody wants to look at it, to see for themselves.
I think it's hard to research anything anymore, because that's all you get. It's a bunch of, they push so much on you.
Right.
You're trying to find something, just innocently.
Mm-hmm.
And instead you just get this push and that push and this push and that push,
Right.
They push and pull you around when you're just trying to cut,
Right.
Like, let's say you're just trying to cut right through a path, and they're trying to say, come over here, look at this, look at that. Whatever you're looking for, you don't want to find. You don't want to read that.
Yeah, we know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't mind attending the March for Life one of these days. It's always in January, so I think that makes it a little harder because it's cold. But good on those people who show up despite it being 20 degrees outside and snowing.
Absolutely.
Babies are worth it.
Yes, they are.
But that's all I got. You ready for yours story?
Yeah, I can go into mine. It's an interesting story, just sort of a follow-up on a lot of the things that we've talked about before.
Sure.
But apparently, we've had this ongoing trouble in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. We've talked about that. We've talked about there are issues with shipping routes and piracy and all kinds of things we've covered in that regard. Well, on top of, I don't know if you've seen some of the stories coming out of Israel with that whole thing, but they've rejected another offer for a peace deal kind of thing. There's not going to be any two-state solution.
There's not going to be any more hostages released, that's all.
Yeah. And a lot of people have been talking about that. There was a piece on the Young Turks that, we'll link if you want to watch something really funny, that guy I call Chunky Yogurt, whatever his real name, Uyghur, what, I don't know what it is. he just had a meltdown. He
Right.
had some Palestinian Jew on his podcast or on his show that they do, and he just unloaded on this guy. They got into a screaming match. There's some conjecture that they did it, it's sort of like a stunt thing, but
Right.
I don't know if that's true or not. That he seemed to get pretty heated, On top of that,
Right.
I was watching an interesting piece about how there's issues with the food supply and like particularly with rice right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to do with some trade issues that are still lingering from the pandemic. And some countries like India is like one of the biggest exporters of rice. America is an exporter of rice, but we don't export very much. We only export 5% of the world's global exports, rice exports. But India does 40%.
Wow.
Yeah. And some of the trouble that was happening, during the pandemic and with supply chain issues and that kinds of stuff, one of the things that countries did was they started putting tariffs and duties, or they would outright ban exports on certain products, like rice, for instance. And, it kind of makes sense in a way because they wanted to have staple products like rice. They wanted to keep those a little closer to home and not allow them to be exported, in case they were needed.
Right. Yeah.
So it kind of makes sense, but it hurt a lot of, it sort of causes this domino effect chain where the people who rely on those exports suddenly don't have the rice that they're used to eating. Countries like Africa and, countries like Africa. Yeah. But, there's a lot of countries in Africa.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were majorly affected by this. And others as well. Sure. Asia, there's lots of people that take in rice.
Right.
So I thought that was kind of interesting, and it's something we've talked about before. Is one of the issues that we ran into in the pandemic is people were having trouble getting things like their medications in this country. And I've said before, that is something that could really be exploited or could really hurt us.
Oh, yeah.
And Trump brought that issue to light. He talked about that a good bit. Right there at the tail end of his presidency. And I just think that's all interesting because, one of the other things that we've talked about is like a World War III or like a second revolution in America. These kinds of talks of big scale war or war that would really affect America. And apparently there's a story. I saw this on Fox News that Matt Blarney or whatever his name is. I might have that wrong, but the link's going to be in there. It's that British sounding guy from Fox News. He's on Fox Business.
Oh, Stuart Barney.
Stuart Barney. Yeah, okay. He had a piece out, it'll be linked, where supposedly there are documents that have been leaked out of Germany from like the World Summit or some world leaders where they have paperwork that shows that Russia is on a timetable. They have these timetable plans to start attacking NATO countries next year.
Yeah, I haven't heard that yet. That's interesting.
Yeah, well, you'll have to watch that clip, like the listeners. You'll have to find that clip. I've sent it to you, so you'll have to watch it. I mean, it's a relatively short video. I want to say it was 3.5 minutes. But it has some really big and scary implications, I mean, just like all of these things have had big and scary implications.
Of course.
But Trump was even asked about this, and this is one of the links, I'll have to send you along as well. I'm not sure that I already did. But Trump was even just asked by somebody out in Iowa whether Trump foresees us as being close or headed towards World War III. And he answered, and he said that we were the closest we've ever been, in his opinion.
Right.
So just some interesting things. And to harken back to what we were saying, we were the closest to peace we were under Trump.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that that Americans will remember that,
right.
and that we will have this snap back to sanity that you were kind of talking about.
Yeah, right.
We need these fires to be put out.
Exactly. Well, I saw a video from Cheryl Atkinson. She has I think it's a Sunday morning news show called Full Measure. And one of the recent segments that they did was talking about the conflict in the Middle East. And now I hadn't prepared notes on this particular thing, but I happen to remember it since you're talking about that. But this guy that was being interviewed, he's some kind of foreign affairs or national security expert. And he says that this whole conflict in the Middle East right now was practically planned out by Iran, because first we had the attacks from Hamas, which is a Iranian-sponsored group.
Mm-hmm.
And then Hezbollah and I think Lebanon to the north of Israel started launching some more missiles. And then we have the Houthis in Yemen with their shipping disruptions in the Red Sea. And then we also have attacks on some bases in Syria and Iraq, I believe.
Yeah, I just saw that about Iraq.
Mm-hmm. So this guy thinks it's pretty much all been planned out. Sort of, I think he says it as, when I make my move, you get ready to make yours. That kind of thing. It's, as opposed to point by point, strategically laid out. But yeah, I think, it makes sense to me that it's all sort of been planned, and because I think one of the things that we learned not too long after October 7th was that Hamas had been planning, or at least getting ready to plan these attacks for 2 years. Well, 2 years before then, back in 2021, wasn't that the year that we pulled out of Afghanistan? Or is that in 22?
I don't recall that.
I'm going to say it was 21. So, because we've talked about how that was one big moment where we showed our weakness.
Absolutely.
And people started making their aggressive moves, these other countries. So I think it makes sense that this has all been planned out. And, everybody's sort of all bringing it to a head over these next couple of years. So you mentioning that document about Russia's plans, I think makes sense to me.
Well, it is scary.
A lot of places have had plans.
Well, and we've said this before, too. It's almost like we're on the brink of something.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting how you were giving that analogy about us being in a fever dream that we need to snap out of and wake up from. Because I saw another thing. This will be another link I'll have to give you that I hadn't sent over already. But I just saw there's an article, a headline, where somebody coming over the border said to a reporter, "You don't know my name now, but you will soon." And it was I guess it spooked this lady enough or whatever. I'm not exactly sure what I saw. It'll be included. You guys can check it out for yourselves. But it just is kind of spooky, the whole thing with the southern border.
Yeah.
We've projected before, or, whatever instead of projected, but we've proposed before that there could be negative intent. There's a lot of bad actors coming over, and I just pray to God that we don't see anything domestic start popping off.
Right.
I think we've had that conversation before.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it is precarious times across the world right now. But hopefully, Trump, if he gets back in office, will help. I'm certainly not saying he's a god or anything that's going to restore the whole world order or back to right. But
especially in 4 years' time.
Right, yeah. But he's shown before in his last term that he can certainly implement policies that help get us on the right path.
Well, and hopefully if America does come to its senses and sees that once again in only 4 years he's able to right the ship, and that it actually is him and his policies driving such things, and proving that Obama had terrible policy, Biden had terrible policy, the Democrats have terrible policy.
Yep.
Maybe America will stay on the right path.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, I don't know who the next person would be to fill Trump's shoes, but hopefully it'll be another Republican, a good Republican.
Yep.
Just keep us on the right path.
Exactly. No more Nikki Grahams.
Nikki Grahams.
Yeah. That's my nickname for her. She's basically like the female Lindsey Graham in the Republican Party, in my opinion.
Well, we definitely don't need war.
No, not at all. Well, that's all I had for all of the stories here. And that all you got?
That's all I got.
All right, then, listeners, if you thought this was a great conservative conversation, please be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, and many more. Please leave a rating and review. You can also subscribe on YouTube. We upload the audio there. And you can also please give us a like, comment, subscribe on there as well.
And as always, we thank you for listening.